Thanks, everyone. So welcome to our panellists here this morning. Yes, my name's Kylie Mercer. I'm one of the directors at the Office of the Inspector General of Emergency Management. Joining me here on stage this morning, we have Tom Wilson, who you've just given us a very inspiring, insightful presentation. Professor Kerrie Wilson, our Queensland Chief Scientist. She is a leading conservation scientist with a strong You can read all about her in our program. Also joining us on stage this morning is Dr. Margaret Cook from Griffith University. May I read part of your bio? Dr. Cook is an environmental historian and a research fellow at the Australian Rivers Institute, Griffith University, and an honorary research fellow at La Trobe University. We also have Ian Williams. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ian has a background as a communication and community engagement strategist. In 2020, he started his role at Noosa Shire Council and has been creating engaging resilience presentations and programs in schools and the aged care sector in Noosa. Ian's work now extends to engaging with District Disaster Management Group and emergency services partners to work closely with communities to foster networks and strengthen resilience. And finally, she needs no introduction, Kate Retzke from Office of the Inspector General of Emergency Management. Welcome, everybody. So, to start things off, first question for you all. Now, Tom, you spoke of the Alpine Fault Magnitude 8 as an example of science plus policy plus research. So is producing evidence sufficient to shape the policies for tomorrow, or do we need to reimagine the structural and cultural systems that determine how research is integrated into decision making? It's a little bit of a play on what was presented just prior.
I think yes, absolutely. It is not enough just to produce the insight or the research. I think one of the things that at least the AF8 project did a really good job of is having useful governance structures where you've got key decision makers involved in the program. They've got a deep awareness and you've got expertise on tap where they can thrash through some of those challenges. But a lot of the time it's drilling down to something that's or making available some insight or actionable evidence where you can quickly and efficiently and effectively implement it in a policy environment. And I think the other thing would be around building trust on both sides of that area. So in some cases, having formal structures, whether it be a panel or a whatever working group that can help with that, but others being in an informal sense or an emergent sense of being, take from the researcher side, being aware of what the policy environment is, what the demands might be, and then being able to quickly and efficiently and effectively meet their needs. So that would be probably the takeaway there.
Fantastic. Kerrie, do you want to add?
Excuse me. Yeah, happy to add. I think you've covered everything really well. Thank you. I guess as a researcher, we often lament that our research isn't being listened or, it's not being taken up. And worse, people on the other side kind of go, why are you doing all that research? And it's never, it's not having any value. And I think, maybe we should all just relax about that a little bit, because we know that there's this big body of knowledge that we need in the world to understand how the world works and understand how people behave. And, as Tom said, some of that is going to be policy relevant in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. And the real challenge, and it's not necessarily on the researchers, but the real challenge is having people that can translate that content into, 2 or 3 dot points that are going to be taken up. So, what that speaks to is working in collaboration across disciplines, working in collaboration across sectors, and kind of just easing up, I think, on this judgment around so much research isn't actionable. Well, actually, some of it wasn't designed to be from the outset. Some of it will have its day. It's just waiting for it. And sure, some of it needs to be surfaced and really pulled out and translated well. So that, there's lots of people that have a role in all of that. Yeah.
I'm going to throw something else into that because I agree with what's been said, but I think what we don't do particularly well is make that overt. We don't make it obvious that the policy is being underpinned by research. So it doesn't give us that trust in the community. So we get able to be put up, well, that's just a policy, it's just government imposing it, or it's just research. And I think what we don't do very well as a community in this room is explain to people out there, those that we're serving and those that we're trying to make more resilient and less vulnerable. I don't think we make that very, very clear that that policy is actually scientifically, rigorously determined. And I think until we do, we're not going to get those relationships of trust that we need to make a difference.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, if I may, Kylie. I was recently lucky enough to attend the Evidence and Implementation Summit in Melbourne with Alison. We had a fantastic time. Follow me on LinkedIn for all my adventures. And there was a fantastic speaker from South Africa where they actually have a legislative mandate for evidence-informed policy. So evidence use is essentially institutionalised by law, and I think that is a really interesting structural approach for making sure that there is evidence integrated into decision making. And also at that conference was ex-NZ PM Sir Bill English, and he actually thinks there should be more Toms. He's really keen to see chief science advisors in every major spending agency, which I think is really smart and astute. But to get us there, what we need is politicians who understand and value data. In fact, they don't just understand it, but they insist on it. So I think there's something to be said at a political level as well.
And finally, Ian.
Yeah, just adding on to that as well, I think in order to be effective, it's got to be circular. So it's making sure that, wherever we can, not only to be effective, but to be sustainable. So part of that obviously comes from making sure people on the ground from the top-down process. And I was really inspired by, Tom's, because it's the language we all want to talk, but it's also the walk we're trying to walk. And I think that's been probably the best thing is it's about making sure that we're just saying that the knowledge gathered is conveyed to researchers. So it's not just where the research sits, but it's also the fact that those on the ground feel like the research is also getting to them from the ground. So, yeah. That's just my bit.
Excellent. So when we talk about and think about the value that researchers provide in that policy space or could provide in that policy space, do we assume that innovation must come only from researchers? Like, what untapped research potential exists within both government and non-government sectors, and how can we harness that? Who wants to go first?
There's a lot of things that are happening outside the research space and the government space, and the community space is really, really active, and the industry space is active. So, some of the innovation might come from, say, insurers, or it might come from people who are actually working on the ground. So in my work where I'm working with communities, I'm not a scientist, I'm a social scientist, I'm an historian. I'm working with communities. I'm seeing a lot of innovation happening on the ground, and I don't know that that's actually being translated. If you see them as research, it's applied research, it's living research, where's that at the table? I'm not seeing it so well.
I think often innovation is thought of as high-tech, high-cost, high-impact solutions to problems, but in reality it absolutely doesn't have to be. It can be small, incremental, low-cost changes. And we don't necessarily have to start from scratch either. As we heard Tom say, there's so much research out there. There's also other sectors that are way more advanced in futures practice and evidence into implementation that we can learn from. We can take successful components from work even outside of the disaster management space and apply it to new contexts. We just have to look outside of the box, I suppose, and be proactive.
Tom?
Yeah, just to add to the excellent contributions so far, a perspective from New Zealand is we have had over a decade of quite sustained investment in Mataranga Māori research, which is our Indigenous knowledge system for Māori. One of the areas that I was certainly really proud around was after Cyclone Gabrielle, in addition to post-event research funding, we stood up a deliberate iwi, which is iwi is a translation for tribe, fund where Māori could access the knowledge that they might need for particularly disaster recovery, acknowledging that often it's very difficult to access the quite bureaucratic science research structures and funding apparatus that at least the New Zealand government loves to develop. And I think just one of the areas there was a lot that was learnt through that process, but one of the areas I think that was really notable was enabling some of the amazing innovations that were coming out at a community level and using the disaster recovery as a springboard for much more broader climate adaptation approaches from literally household level through to iwi level, which was cool.
Ian?
Just going to say very much the same thing, although along the lines of obviously our First Nations and the wonderful words that came from Uncle Steve before, but I think it's really around making sure that that's a real untapped knowledge area. In Noosa, we're really fortunate. We've developed a relationship with the Kabi Land and Sea Rangers, so we're able to bring them into our cultural space, but also just in that. So I think there's a real First Nations or long-term community members and NGOs in relation to that circle.
Just to finish, I guess, on this question. So innovation within government, we're privileged in Queensland to have quite a strong science base within Queensland government, and they're stood up in this space around disasters and emergency management in a range of ways, and inclusive of monitoring recovery or being involved in recovery activities. And I think that there's an important kind of opportunity there for data collation, longitudinal data collection through time in response to these events that maybe we're not maximising. And part of this comes to the nature of public servant work, lots of demands. But I guess I'm a strong advocate for ensuring that our executive recognise that contributions to new knowledge that our staff are generating, the time that's needed for them to publish that work in order to get it peer-reviewed, and also establishing, I think, within Queensland Government relationships with the universities, as we have within the disaster space with QDRA, but also joint appointments between university and government. We've got some really fantastic examples, like our climate modelling and missions team are a lot of joint appointments, and that brings a real strength to allowing them to be doing cutting-edge science that's kind of applied to one of our most critical knowledge areas around climate modelling and emissions modelling. So, I think there's some models around employment and mobility that can help surface that innovation across sectors as well.
Fantastic. So if we touch a little bit now on, Tom, previously you raised basically low probability, high risk scenarios. And if we think about using foresight going forward to equip governments to anticipate and adapt to the emerging challenges that are facing us into the future, how can or does research really contribute to us providing parameters around how we respond in those low probability, high risk scenarios?
Well, I think it's fundamental. We must have a clear evidence base around what we're facing. I guess one of the perspectives I'd bring was perhaps a lazy assumption from at least New Zealand academics, or maybe just say myself, was that the system doesn't deal with uncertainty well. The system deals with uncertainty exceptionally well. In fact, that's their whole thing. They just express it in different ways. One of the, I'll say privileges, but comes with a double-edged sword, is in my world I often interface with a lot of the national security folk, and the intelligence community has some excellent approaches to looking at those long-term insights, and often with very difficult, uncertain data. And I think there's a lot to be learnt of how both worlds, perhaps natural hazard risk or just DRR, however we want to frame this scientific discipline, can interface with that area. And I think there's some real gains to be made there. I think the other just perhaps simple thought is there'll always be a space for researchers to provide that thought leadership. I think it's a really fundamental part of the research community, is to keep asking curious questions and to be curious. And at times be courageous around what you're researching and what you're looking for, but perhaps with a slight nuance to it of make sure when you're presenting that, like, be as useful as possible. How are you presenting that you're docking in that can be understandable, useful and actionable where appropriate.
I'm adding a sentence to that because I think it works the other way too, is that, research government agencies or whoever we're doing the research for need to challenge us, and they need to make it very clear what would be a useful thing for us to be doing. I mean, I love research. I'll chase any question. So give me the right questions to chase and make it iterative. If I come up with something that was unexpected by both parties, then it's really important that that relationship is there, that you can say, actually, what about this question? And that's fantastic, because that, I think, is when we'll start getting the really good applied research that works both ways. We need research in the system, and we need the government agencies and the others to tell us what works. I mean, these systems are really confusing and complicated. That's one of your C words. And that's one thing that these complicated agencies can do for research, is help us so we can help you. To use Alistair's word, it's it's that collaboration, but it's both ways.
Yeah, I thought maybe now's a good time to market a couple of things that we've stood up to help with these challenges. One is the Queensland Science Collaboration Gateway, and it was kind of designed because, as a researcher sitting out in the university sector, I would often go, oh gosh, I've got this great relationship, this great contact in this agency, and then the next time I try and call them, they've moved on. And I'm like, right. And that's fantastic. I know mobility within government is really important, and there are very good reasons for it. But it does create challenges for that connection and collaboration. So the Collaboration Gateway is, within my office, an opportunity for people to pick up the phone and just say, hey, we're working on this, or we've got these research outcomes we think is going to be really useful for this key government priority. Who can I talk to? And we do the hard work trying to work out where that person is or where those people are. And the other one is we've stood up a social sciences reference group. Those that work for Queensland Government here would know that kind of the 4 big government headline priorities at the moment are really social problems, social challenges. And so we've been bringing out the social science expertise, of which there is fantastic expertise in Queensland, and really trying to bring that type of knowledge to bear to our challenges as well. So I just thought I'd just sell those 2 things, because it's kind of it's often hard to make things known to everybody. But yeah, there's a couple of things that we're doing.
Well, if Kerrie's spruiking her goods, I'll do mine. Thanks for that. Look, in disaster management, we know research is a key support of what we do. It's in our strategic policy statement. It's in the state disaster management plan. But we can do better, and so we actually have a partnership with QRA and QPS at the moment to improve how research moves through the system from ideation through to implementation, and we're really excited about that project and what that can bring to improve the system. And from a futures and foresight perspective as well, the Office of the IGEM is trying to make space for that in the disaster management sector. So this year we hosted our first Futures Connect Roundtable event, and we also co-hosted a Futures Summit as well. And we heard from almost every Queensland department that futures and foresight is something that we should be investing in to help us define and design policy for resilience, prevention, preparedness when it comes to the disaster management space. I think the complexity lies in that it takes commitment and investment and stewardship, and it's already overwhelming enough just to think about the summer that's about to happen, let alone a summer that's going to happen in 20 years' time. But we hope that our Futures Champion Network can help move that forward in the disaster management sector.
Just last, I was going to say, with the adaptation to the emerging challenges, part of it is also making sure that we can get politicians and government policy makers at all levels to be honest with the researchers, which comes back to Margaret, and about past mistakes. It's okay to be wrong, but it is also very much around that the information or environmental adjustments are made.
Wonderful. Some really amazing opportunities there for everyone to tap into, I think, moving forward. And with that, if we look ahead in terms of thinking big and dreaming big and bit blue sky thinking, I guess, or ideas, when you're looking at this research forum program, and you're looking at the value that it adds to the sector and different sectors, what are the possibilities and plausible scenarios that could emerge, and what ideas should we be aiming for? How can we begin, and what is it that we can do today, each and every one of us, that can ensure that we are moving forward in a positive way to really be prepared for the future that lies ahead for us? What's the start?
Yeah, I'll start. I really love the focus and the interest in foresights and futures thinking at the moment. And so I think there's an opportunity at future forums like this to kind of do a retrospective on how that enhanced policy or how that enhanced application of knowledge. And the reason I say that is because it's I guess it's quite challenging to keep track of, we did this and therefore we we changed direction and we used this lever and we did that. So really we have to be proactive in kind of monitoring the uptake of that knowledge and its incorporation into policy. And we've got some work actually just submitted for publication recently on Antarctica, in the context of Antarctica, where they do a lot of horizon scanning and foresights work, and looked at the retrospective over the last 20 years of how that's informed policy. So that's one thing I'd love to see in future forums. The other is just generally, blown away by Tom's slides, probably not going to go to New Zealand for hiking anytime soon again, but I found really interesting seeing the data and the analysis of that data and the importance of that capability. But I'm not confident that we have that data analysis capability at our fingertips in Queensland. We have it, but I'm not sure that we have it in order to systematically inform what we're doing. I'm also not confident that we're investing and we're looking at the expertise to communicate that in a way that doesn't trigger a perverse response. And I know we have challenges around communication and disaster and emergency management here in our state. So, in a future forum, I would love to see some kind of, analysis and dissection of that capability and how it's been used and what lessons we learn. I think that retrospective and always thinking about like Ian said, how did we go? What can we do better? I'm talking to the converted here, but this is, we'd be really critical to do in future forums, I think.
Just go along. If I'm thinking about the future, what I'd really like to see is a disaster fund. There's the sustainability fund at a national level, because research funding is very hard to get. And so that's the first thing. But having got that research funds and having done all the things we need to do, I don't think we're particularly good about measuring, which is exactly another form of measuring that you're talking about, is measuring impact. So, we're doing a lot of research, we're doing a lot of policy, but what difference is it making on the ground? So what I would love to see in the forum in 10 years' time is when we're coming back and talking about what a difference we've made. That in 2025, this is where we were, and in 2035, when we've done our climate, Paris Agreement stuff, that we've actually really made a difference and we've made people less vulnerable. We've actually started adapting for climate. We've moved people, we've transitioned. We're doing all of that sort of stuff. And we're not talking so much about reactive. We can put up a whole lot of particularly wonderful proactive examples of where we've made a difference. That's the forum I'm coming to in 10 years' time.
That's great. Gosh, there's just fabulous thoughts. I don't have terribly much to add, other perhaps than just a few practical thoughts of one of the areas that this probably exposes what a crappy academic I am, but one of the things I didn't quite realise inside government was just how much effort goes into government strategy documents. And it's unbelievable. Like there's that is a wonderful area of looking at where your strategic foresight may need to be going, particularly as a researcher, or if you're interested around what the thinking is. It's a great way to look at where is direction going, and are there any gaps or issues, and being positively critical around that. One of the things that New Zealand Public Service does is we have things called LTIBs, or long-term insight briefings, which are an opportunity for public servants or the agencies to put out what they think are the long-term issues in their portfolio area. We've found that quite useful, and again, I've really stressed that with our researchers, that that's something they should be docking into. Again, to be critically looking at it as, are they thinking about the right things, or have that conversation. And I guess the final one is just coming back to that AF8 example, or we did another similar thing around catastrophic risks. Having a sprint, or just something that gives you some focusing effect on what you want to quickly progress, and bringing researchers, policy people, practitioners, and everyone else that needs to be involved into that for a short burst at a high priority area, I think has real merit. We very quickly progressed a lot of our catastrophic risk work in that regard. And the researcher in me my skin was crawling. I was like, this doesn't feel robust enough, da-da-da-da. But the policy people were like, this is great. We're finally getting what we need. And so I think it comes back to that, balancing both worlds dimension.
Kate.
Completely endorse all ideas. Fantastic. It's hard to be down this end of the line, isn't it, Ian?
Apologies.
I will throw one thing in, though. It's something practical we can do now, I think, to get us where we need to be in 10 years' time. Can we please invest and focus on our young professionals? Our early career researchers, young people coming into government, who, one day will be making the decisions, but also will be living with the consequences of the decisions that we make today. So can we please have them be a part of this conversation?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think along the same lines. There are a few things when we talk about the entire system and its complexity. It's about today, and not the cheesiness, but obviously the relationships that I already have in this room, but also the ones I'm looking forward to after this, typify a little bit of which is really the complexity. Complexity sort of means wholeness, which in fact is three-dimensional. So it's making sure that the community element is in there as well. And at the community level, I suppose I work in that personal energy, community collateral space all the time. And that's how we build the resilience. But it's also around making sure, and I said this to my table earlier, we're in a situation here where we need to make sure that in any form of that, in those future decision makers, that wherever we can and wherever possible, that incredible knowledge base and relationship base that's developed by officers or managers in positions can stay there and stop walking out the door after 2 years of contract is up, because that's where, as much as a lot of the people stay in the disaster management space, they move around way too often as a result. So that would be the futures part of it.
Right, so I've set your agenda for the next 10 years, Kate, so you're welcome. Just before we move on to, we've got people ask, and certainly the room is available to ask questions via Slido. There's some questions rising to the top. It feels like it's got a bit of a social media bend to it there, everyone, just to put you in the right headspace. Was there any other idea, innovation, concept that we hadn't yet addressed in the questions that we've raised here this morning that you wanted to have a platform for, just before we move on? Thank you.
We talk a lot about multidisciplinary research. It's really, really hard because the research institutions at university level are all about Australian research councils. You immediately get a research code, you get it assessed by one discipline or another discipline. So you do a multidisciplinary project, you don't score well. So a lot of our funding models are not interdisciplinary. So we talk the talk, but we can't walk it. So if we're talking about changing research models, we need we can sometimes do a lot with a lot smaller amounts of money. They're often big chunks of money. Sometimes a little can do a lot. And also multidisciplinary can take a really long time to set up. Doing it properly takes a long time. In a 2-year grant, that's really difficult. So those models don't really work very well.
I have one small soapbox that I'll stand on before we go to questions as well. Because I do want to acknowledge that I think in disaster management here in Queensland, we do collaboration really well. I think that's part of the reason why our system is stood up as, one of the good examples globally, which is absolutely fantastic. Just having people here in the room today, having this discussion, seeing all the names online as well, is absolutely fantastic. I don't think the crux of the problem lies in we're afraid to talk to each other or to work together. We've got that nailed. I think one of the issues is that when we are able to do those collaborations and where there's funding is in the response and recovery phase, I do think there's a gap in the prevention, preparedness and resilience as well. So I'd like to see a little bit of a shift in the model to look in more of that front-end loading.
She speaks my language.
I was going to say, probably I'm going to pick that up straight away as a resilience person, I suppose. The main thing in all of this too is I suppose the community and environment part of this can only coexist if they're recognised as living entities in their own right. And I think in a lot of cases, it's about not only living and breathing, but flourishing, and how we can make sure that there's that the policymakers are acknowledging this, but it's also the fact that ecological complexity in a nutshell is that it's hoping that in 10 to 15 years that can be a reality. I think the main thing, it's the engagement part, and for me I do that constantly, and that's the part I love. But I suppose it's also, there is a real world impact on the side of things that were mentioned a little bit earlier. And part of that is the listening part. So it's making sure that we do all this well, but in order to do that, and it was something that, back to Uncle Steve at the beginning, it's making sure that we need really clear communication, mutual respect, and that's only when trust is possible.
And with that in mind, it appears that one of the big questions that is coming through online in terms of communication and the quality of the communication, the question that's appeared but to the top is, how do you combat fake news through social media, such as TikTok? People will accept face value of information from social media that is not truthful. So how do we burst that bubble?
May I? Okay, I love this topic. And it's been one of my kind of priority things to tackle while being in this role around misinformation. And personally, I keep a log of how many times I get personally caught out by fake news and stuff online that's not real. I'm up to 4 this year, so I would challenge you all to keep your own personal log. We're all susceptible to it, and it also means that we're all play a role in combating it. So as researchers, when you see your knowledge being misused, we have to speak up, and that's hard to do. You put yourself in a vulnerable position yourself. So our institutions really need to start working with us to support us when we're calling out misinformation. I think our government colleagues, we have comms team in all of our agencies. They're great at sharing the good news and the success stories. I don't see too much kind of proactive, getting on the front foot, pre-bunking, debunking messages that are going to cause confusion down the track. And I would really love to see our comms agencies, our comms teams, looking at what's best practice in that space and taking advice around that. The other again, going back to the personal level, we all need to take a breather when we see something that doesn't look squeaky clean online. The worst thing we can do is share it. It's so simple, just don't share it. I nearly shared this picture, I was so embarrassed, of this giant horse that was being circulated on social media. Did anyone else see it? I was like, what is that? Anyway, I nearly shared it with all my family, and hang on, there's something wrong with that horse. And I took a step back and I didn't share it. Anyway, silly example, but you really need to take a breather before sharing information and reporting to through official channels as well. But that's some things. There are many more.
A quick story, I'm known as a storyteller. Last Friday, the Brisbane Courier Mail put out an article about the increasing risk of cyclones this summer because the seas are 2 degrees warmer. I shared it. I have had so much pushback and hate responses about scaring the punters, being a left woke climate change person. It's been incredible. best sharing post I've ever done. Put it on LinkedIn, nothing. Speaking to the converted in LinkedIn, aren't I? But the ignorance in the responses and the personal attacks are really quite amazing. So I think we are the converted. We can't underestimate how much that community needs educating. It really doesn't understand. I thought it was an informative argument about 2 degrees warming. I thought it was a chance to educate. I'm an educator. I think it's important to inform the community about risk and increasing hazards. Never occurred to me. I would get vitriol every day, constantly. So I don't really know how we combat it. Maybe I shouldn't have shared it. I have, but in answer to your challenge, did I respond? No, because I thought I don't need to be trolled anymore, but I don't know how. Sometimes it's really, really hard. Do I want to take that on? So yes, I think we need to be brave, but it's hard.
I just totally endorse that. I think in particular the institutional support is really important. We understand Australia's been similar, but certainly in New Zealand, some of our COVID experts have had very, very tough experiences. One of the areas that we've found some success, and I stress this is not the silver bullet, but it is part of a possible solution, is we've used our science panels as a really important way to provide consistent messaging. So one of the areas when we're in a response, we'll make sure that we've got what is the agreed scientific interpretation of the event, what are the key messages that we want going out in terms of preparedness or recovery or whatever it might be. I'd stress it's not a controlled environment, it's simply providing coordinated messaging for the scientists, and I mean the term scientist in the most inclusive way possible, and so that they can often fill that media void if the operational agencies or whatever are getting overwhelmed. An example of that was with the Whakaari eruption in 2019, White Island, as you may know it, where GNS Science went to ground for 3 days and just were not engaging with media because of all sorts of complicated reasons. And so the academics on the Volcano Science Advisory Panel filled that media void, and we did a lot of work in that regard. The final quick thought, and I know it's a really obvious one, but I'll just say it, the role of the education system writ large, but all of us, to enhance and develop and further critical thinking skills is paramount. I think it's always been a really important component, but continuing to develop that, ensure that our young professionals are coming through well equipped for the career ahead of them, but also for ourselves to continue to upskill and whatever, is really, really important, and perhaps never been quite so stark at the moment.
I'm hopeful that technology will be part of the solution for this. I mean, essentially we have no choice anyway, but that things will change in the coming years about how we receive disaster warnings and disaster information, and I think it's going to become really hyper-localised, where you may even one day get a personal set of advice messages specific to your specific needs and vulnerabilities and where you live. I don't think that is that far away. Bring it on, I reckon.
Same. My job is to drive people towards disaster dashboards. That's ultimately is saying, by all means, if your community is held together with Facebook or TikTok or anything, that's fine. But ultimately, this trying to make that's the job. Sign up for the alert, go to the disaster dashboards as a place of truth.
Central sources of truth, very important. The second question let's move to the top. Should intelligence training and awareness be a core part of all DM roles? The ability to analyse the so what of information across functions. Great question. Who wants to tackle that one?
I think I've been voluntold to start. I'm always a little bit reticent around hard and fast rules. I think if your role demands it, there's always, or would find use from it, then absolutely. I think intelligence training courses are super helpful. I've certainly learned a huge amount from the intelligence community, both in an EM sense and in a spooky, weird other thing sense. I think that, but it's all contextually dependent on what your role is and perhaps what your natural interests are as well. So I would be cautious around having a hard and fast rule there.
Any other thoughts?
I think it comes to that critical thinking. That, you know, we don't value critical thinking as much as we should. And a plug for the humanities, that's exactly what we teach, and it's being defunded. But that's my hobby horse. So I think critical thinking is important, and that's in that social media as well. And I think in terms of working with our early career people, that's what we need to be teaching them, is that you're going to get different courses for different roles, but that's what they've got to develop.
I guess the other, in addition to intelligence, what was the word? Intelligence training, is training in deciphering the quality of information and knowing what to look for in terms of markers of good quality evidence and information. There's unfortunately, you know, there's a whole factory out there of journals that are generating kind of suboptimal publications, and not all information is of the quality that we need to base our decisions. So, you know, it's coming through the high schools now in terms of curriculum, in terms of assessing quality of information, but we probably all need a little bit of an uplift in that and what markers to look for as well.
Great. I believe we have time for one more question, and based on the Slido questions that are available, that question is, how do we make politicians see and use evidence? Politicians are motivated by votes and election cycles. So what's your elevator pitch to a politician about the value of research and how we operate, the value of operationalising research? Trying to tie it all together there. I believe you've been voluntold again. Unless, Ian, you would like to take the first.
I think the most important thing is that's the community you're standing in front of, and quite often that's where a politician will come in and say, I know these people. But in a lot of cases, when armed with the right information in the right way, and I think that's probably where I get most excited in the resilience space, is our communities are becoming more disaster resilient. We've had indicators locally, in our case, 3 days before Alfred finally landed, we had the largest green waste days in the history of the Sunshine Coast and Noosa. We also have now the new, obviously from toilet paper and COVID, so too is sandbags to cyclones. And we know that no matter what happens next, with the next event that we get, that there is going to be an incredible, how I can help is through a sandbag. So whatever it is that the knowledge needs to be is about making sure that the community is empowered, not necessarily to throw it back in the face of the politician, but not necessarily to also say, that sounds great, because there is research now that is becoming much more available for that response from community members to make sure. So it's about making sure that there are more people in that resilient space, without trying to do the plug, to make sure that there is information that is out there, that is available, that becomes part of their way of thinking and acting and living.
I think the evidence is in the numbers. We can't afford to keep managing disasters in the way that we currently are. The dollar figures are just mind-boggling, and money talks. So I think we need a compelling narrative to get that message across. The other thing I would say is, for not just politicians but our entire sector, is to consider what evidence means to us. There's a huge spectrum of evidence, and it doesn't have to be formal, privileged places where we get that evidence from. Lived experience is also really valuable and potentially equal. And I, as part of that umbrella, I'm also talking about Indigenous ways of knowledge as well. So, that's my response.
Fantastic. Tom.
Wonderful responses. Just I guess quick thoughts from me would be trust is essential. And I think in someone like my role, where you're often directly advising ministers or part of a team that's advising them, or even a Prime Minister, that trust is earned. And I think having a clear understanding of what are their motivations, but also what is your lane, and stay in your lane. I think one of the strategies we've used with our minister, I'm sure he won't mind me sharing this, is we use pizza nights. So we go down to the National Crisis Management Centre, which is this horrible bunker thing underneath New Zealand's beehive. And we have a pizza night and talk around what some of the issues of the day might be, or what he may want to explore more. For example, tsunami risk is something we did recently. But I think the most compelling thing, certainly that I've seen, is sound economic analysis. And just to pick up on a point before, a lot of disaster metrics might be around casualties and other challenging ways to communicate it. But one of the areas that I guess we've put a lot of effort into is partnering up with Treasury and our Reserve Bank around what the investment case is for first, second, and third order effects of disaster resilience investment, and that it seems to be one of the angles which are quite effective at the moment, and that's not in particular around what the value into the social domain would be as well.
Two things. One is I think we need to measure it and show examples, and we know that every dollar we spend, we save, whatever. We've got to tell it. It's very hard to tell good stories, though. So we need to engage our media to not always tell the bad stories. It's our job as researchers and communicators to share those good news. And the other thing I would say about politicians is they are often reactive. Well, you often don't see great forward-thinking leadership in a politician. They often respond to their constituents. So if the constituents are doing it and they're asking for it, or more importantly, demanding it, I think we will drag the politicians along with us. The momentum's already happening. We've just got to harness it and fuel it.
Finally.
Yeah. So I've pretty much written a thesis on this one on a piece of paper and crossed things off as people have said it. But I guess just to emphasise that our politicians are, elected officials. They're incredible people, and their jobs, I guess, are, not a job that I would ever put my hand up to have. So, just on the basis of the enormous tensions and pressures that each of them are kind of navigating. So then also working out who their trusted confidants are, and chief of staff and their ministerial officers and people in the agencies. And as I said, mobilising networks and things like the collaboration gateway that we've put forward to try and build those connections around their trusted confidants. The other component is around the vote thing, and it's a bit of a knowledge crisis in Australia at the moment. There are many challenges on households. I think we all acknowledge and respect that, but we all have a role to play in translating what new knowledge and evidence means, and what it means in terms of high-paying jobs, what it means in terms of new investments into our state, what it means in terms of new industries, our productivity. So there's a role that we have to play in translating what evidence means for our economy at large, and that helps with the kind of influencing the voters component as well. And some of this starts with in schools and influencers and parents as well. So, that's a much bigger kind of answer to that question, I think, than what was anticipated. But if our country, if our state is going to continue to thrive, we really need to put knowledge at the centre of household conversations, and that knowledge is generated through evidence and through research. So, thanks.
Better get on the TikToks with all that. All right, and I think that brings us to time. Yes, Al? Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panellists here this morning who've explored some really key questions, shared their insights and identified some opportunities and thoughts about how we can bridge the divide perhaps between research and real world, and with community being central to the decisions that are made now and into the future. So thank you very much to the panellists and to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've just got a little token to say thank you for being part of our panel. We did get a lot of questions, and what we'll do is we'll group them up and provide them to the panellists, and keep an eye on the next couple of editions of our Research Connect newsletter, where we'll start to unpack some of those questions and themes.